Today's topic is social and emotional learning, which the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning defines as the process through which children and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. While SEL has always been a crucial part of student learning and success, this past year of virtual and hybrid learning have brought the importance of SEL to the forefront as we all try to navigate pandemic learning. Today, we are proud to bring you two rock stars in the field of SEL. Our first is Mr. TJ Belasco, and our second is going to be Ms. Alisha Lorenzo. So TJ Belasco is a teacher at Lower Cape May Regional High School. In his time at Lower Cape May, he's taught everything from 9th grade failures to 12th grade advanced placement. Currently, he's teaching advanced placement literature and composition, AP capstone, and the future educators course, just like many of you. His experience at Lower Cape May Regional also earned him the 2019-2020 Cape May County Teacher of the Year. In addition to teaching, he also serves on the Children of Cape May County as the West Cape May School Board President. He has been an active school board member for 20 years. In his time at West Cape May, they've introduced a sensory path and multiple avenues to address children's social and emotional well-being. He's also been involved with the St. Baldrick's Foundation, raising money for research on pediatric cancer. This past year, he was able to raise over $16,300 for a 12-year total of $128,000 and a school-wide total of $281,412. That is amazing. Finally, through his certification through the Mindfulness Mediation Teacher Program, TJ has started the Mindful Classroom, providing guided meditation for teachers and beach meditation classes in Cape May. I'll be seeing you at those beach meditation classes. Alisha Lorenzo is the founding owner of Living Yes and the Living Yes Foundation. Created from her passion and commitment to education, social justice, mental health, and contemplative practices, Alisha takes a healing-centered approach to systemically address individual and collective trauma and build the emotional literacy of all members of the school, family, and community. Alisha received her baccalaureate in movement sciences and education and has worked in public education as a teacher and student assistance counselor for almost 20 years. Before leaving her traditional role in public education, she served as New Jersey's first SEL coordinator, designing and implementing an integrative education model. She received her master's in psychological counseling and is a licensed clinician in private practice in Red Bank. Alisha is also the interim deputy director for Garden State Equality, New Jersey's largest LGBTQ+ advocacy organization, working to create legal and lived equality for all New Jerseyans. She's been recognized many, many times, and also as the New Jersey Governor's ESP of the Year, awarded by the New Jersey Department of the Education. She is most proud of the honor of raising her two young boys. And without further ado, we're going to get right into the questions and talk to our amazing rock star hosts. So TJ, go ahead and take it away.
Well, it was interesting when I started thinking about how to introduce this whole concept and where it all came from. I think SEL in my life has really emerged knowing social emotional learning in the last 5 years. But if I look back on my career, I think I've been drawn to it my entire life. Like there's never been a point where that wasn't something that I did. I look at my first year I ever started teaching. As I said, I had a group of, we had a team approach, and our team, the kids I taught were 9th graders who had all failed at least 2 classes in 8th grade. Some of them had failed all the classes, but we had a really innovative approach that retention was going to be more harmful than helpful. So we coordinated a group of teachers who would all work with these kids to get them to where they needed to be. And in a lot of cases, it was just providing a fair motivation. It's funny, in that group, there was a young lady I connected to. She was having a lot of problems at home. She just felt comfortable talking to me. And what's interesting about her is she ended up dropping out of school. However, my wife and I have stayed very close to her. We have her over for dinner frequently, and we've helped her to go back and get her certification as an EMT. She's now been certified to teach an EMT program. And to me, that was something that was a real lesson every time I look at students. There are students that the school format doesn't work for, but that doesn't mean they should be forgotten or written off. They just need some kind of guidance. From there, I think and I don't mean to say this because I think it's every teacher and any teacher, but personally as an English teacher, when there was a push to do away or to minimize literature and start teaching more nonfiction because it was going to better prepare people for the workplace, there was a brilliant article that I've read and I send out to parents all the time, and it was in the New York Times, why we should read Faulkner. And the concept of it was reading literature builds empathy, that when you read literature, you become a more empathetic person. So I think being a literature major, being drawn from that, part of that empathy is something that has really come with me my whole life. Now, recently in the last 5 years, I've been lucky enough. We have a assistant superintendent in Cape May County, Michael McKnight. Michael is a godsend. He is an amazing, amazing man. And he has started to, and I see you smiling, Alicia. So you can't know Michael and not smile because it's just who he is. But Michael has started to run with another woman, a professor, Lori DeSholes, a program called a resiliency program, teaching administrators, teachers, and all support staff. Because in essence, in a school, from the bus driver they see in the morning to the cafeteria worker they deal with, everybody has to look at the trauma that students go through. So Michael has a book, Eyes Are Never Quiet. It was one of the best books I've read in the education aspect of it. Along with that, outside of the classroom, and this ties in very much so, I guess I got drawn, okay, long story is when I was in college, in addition to literature, I've always been interested in Eastern philosophy. And then that drew me into my own personal meditation practice, which has been life-changing. So 2 years ago, I started a program to be certified as a meditation teacher. And what I did was, we had a couple students 2 years ago. I'm going to call them out right now, even though they're not here, Katya Simonson and Isabella Garagoza, who came to me and said, why don't we do something with that here? So we formed a group at school called Mindfulness Over Matter. We have a yoga instructor, I do the meditation, and then the art teacher works with art therapy. And we rotate each week what we do. So we've started that program through school, and it has been absolutely wonderful. And what's interesting about it is, and you see the needs of kids, especially to all of those people who are looking to go into education, if we work for 45 minutes to an hour in class, it's amazing how the kids who just want to stay after because they want to have the conversation, they feel comfortable talking and providing that time. So it's not just the activity itself. It's really just giving them somebody who's going to listen. And then 2 years ago, I also looked at the same thing and said, well, teachers could use this. So every Wednesday morning, I run mindfulness sessions for the teachers, anybody who can make it before school. We start a half hour before school, and we either do a breathing exercise, we've gone through tapping exercises, and then generally a meditation program. And it's just, even for the teachers, it's just things that are a remarkable thing. And then recently I've started beach meditation, and this year, because of the students' request, I'm actually going to do 2 sessions because most of my students have voiced to me they feel more comfortable when it's only students. They don't want adults there. So I'm going to do 1 adult session and then 1 student session for them connecting. But that's kind of really where my journey's been. And it's interesting. I started explaining this to people a couple years ago. As an AP teacher, there's so much push for the test and there's so much push for material. But all of a sudden, my mind has shifted where I'm less concerned. I mean, I'm not to say I prepare them as best I can. I go through it, but I'm really much more concerned. I've really just picked up the mantra that I teach students. I don't teach the subject. And the subject comes like, but I teach students first. And I want to close with, and I have it on my phone because I had to get kicked out of my class today because we lost electric. So I had to come home in order to be able to log in. But I taped a quote from a book, Teacher and Child, a book for parents and teachers. This is taped to my front desk where I read it every single morning to myself. And it says, I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. I possess tremendous power to make life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis is escalated or de-escalated. If we treat people as they are, we make them worse. If we treat people as they ought to be, we help them become what they are capable of becoming. And I find it helpful to read that and remind myself every single morning that that's the power we have as teachers, and we can't abuse it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Thank you so much, TJ. Thank you for your insight, and that beach meditation and yoga sounds absolutely amazing. So I'm sure your students appreciate it. I know as an adult, I certainly would. Alisha, I'm gonna turn it over to you now.
Thanks so much, TJ. It was so great to hear the things that you were saying and relate on several levels, you know, about SEL just kind of being a part of you and not really having this starting point to it, but just kind of always an approach that you took. I can relate to that. And also, you know, the things that you said about the things that helped you in your life, how you integrated those into the work you did with young people, like meditation. I have a similar journey, but I'll take us all the way back to when I was a kid. You would have thought, and many people thought, that I would have become some type of actress. I was always performing. I was, you know, as an adolescent, I was putting on shows in my living room for my older sister's friends. And so, you know, in many ways, I think that performing and entertaining are a part of education, and they're a part of kind of this role we play in telling whatever stories that we are telling as storytellers, to engage young people in the content, whether it's literature or history, or even math or science, right? It's about these stories and the way that we share those stories. So I didn't become an actress, but in many ways, I feel like I could tap into that as I do the work I do today. But I really think back on education. What put me in that pathway of becoming an educator was phenomenal educators. You know, I look back on my experience in education, and I had really great experiences. I know that I have the privilege of like really just being connected to my teachers. They really were impressionable in my life. And so it made sense to me that I wanted to emulate them and do the work that they did, because I know they impacted me so much. And when we think about SEL is so much about the relationship and building these healthy, competent relationships with adults. And looking back again on my relationship with my teachers, I still maintain and have those relationships today. So my third grade teacher, who was at some point my principal in middle school, is a friend of mine today. My high school teacher, who really ignited this passion for equity and social justice in me, and gave me the agency to create a club as a high school freshman called Erase End Racism and Sexism Everywhere, and exposed me to opportunities like speaking in front of the New York Department of Education as a teenager. Influenced my life incredibly, in fact, directly related to the work that I do today. My 8th grade English teacher, this is Miss Miller, Miss Cardiello, Mrs. Riker. These folks, these women had such a profound impact on me that it really just kind of made sense that I would want to emulate them and become an educator. And so I did. And I think, you know, there's an important piece here about our identities. And so one of the teachers I named, Miss Miller, she was an out lesbian educator. And she was the first person who I saw positively in connection to my own identity as a lesbian person. And so I think in many ways, I didn't know what else was possible, like what else I could do. And when I came out, there was so much fear that my mother had for me and about my life and what that would mean and what my opportunities would be. And so I saw Miss Miller as a very successful person who had lots of positive influence on me. And it made sense that I became a phys ed teacher, just like she was, right? And so I think when we think about identity, it's so important that we show especially marginalized folks in these full identities and have these full opportunities and possibilities to their lives. And so I later learned there were many more opportunities for me to explore my gifts and talents outside of being a phys ed teacher. And so I taught middle school for a while in the beginning of my career. I had also, from the time I had been in high school, worked in social justice and advocacy through nonprofits. And so that work continued alongside of my work as an educator. And then after my mom had died, I had gone on my own healing journey. And that was right in my first 2 years of teaching. I lost my mother to cancer. And I went on this healing journey, and my grief journey included being introduced by other teachers, not necessarily in the school system, around meditation and mindfulness and yoga. And so those became an important component and tools for me to regulate my emotions and manage my grief and heal. And so when I switched from being a middle school teacher to a high school teacher, I went from working in Bergen County, New Jersey to Asbury Park. So very different socioeconomic status in the community and different issues, but I saw both communities struggling. I saw, our most privileged youth really struggling with their mental health and managing these big emotions and seeking kind of meaning and of their life and all of the things that they had access to. And then I saw my students in Asbury Park coming to the table with a ton of unaddressed trauma and challenges, responsibilities beyond what any child should experience. And I continued to think, why is it that we are not introducing young people to the tools that I have learned as an adult to manage stress and to cope with grief and the traumas? And so I started knocking on this door of integrating what we now call SEL and mindfulness and meditation and movement into schools. 2006, right? And so I got a lot of no's along the way. Lots of people said, no, we can't do that. We don't do this in education. There was even talk about how religion would, this is religious and we can't bring these practices into school. And so I have to say that led me to become really burnt out by 10 years later, 10 years later of knocking on that door, knowing what we could give access to students as tools to help their academics and not being able to. And so at the height of my burnout, I, was looking to get out of education completely. And then there were some changes in my district, and I had been given the green light by our superintendent, who was then our superintendent, Lamont Repollet, who became our commissioner of education. And he had given me the green light to go ahead and try, integrating these things into education with our students in 2016. And what that allowed me to do was tap into my purpose and my passion and my personality. And all of those things came together in this work that created such tremendous meaning for me and agency to do what I knew mattered for young people. And we had great outcomes of that work that we did. And so after that first year in that pilot, we went K through 12, and every student in Asbury Park had access to an integrative wellness approach to education, including recognizing trauma and being restorative in our practices and lifting up identity and providing opportunities and access to mindfulness and meditation and so on and so forth. And so where I am today is a little bit different because that work kind of took off, and school boards, I was privileged to have school boards take me on a tour of the state. I spoke to every single county about the work that was happening in Asbury and the outcomes that we were having. And from there, I made a decision that while my heart and the work in Asbury wasn't done yet, that there was a calling to really support people in schools and education associations across the state to help them implement more of an integrative framework. And so today I get to do that. I'm a consultant for schools across the state, and I work with tons of schools, tons of educators, tons of school leaders. In fact, I just left a presentation this morning in person. And that's the work I get to do now today, to spread this throughout our state. And in addition to that, I did take on becoming the deputy director of Garden State Equality, New Jersey's largest LGBTQ org. And there I'm having the opportunity to develop a self-healing community model. So really building those bridges between education and community, and helping tap into the wisdom of each individual community, so that the healing that's already happening, because we know that it's already happening for so many people and so many communities and pockets, can be spread more widely throughout each city. And so I guess in that, I also realized that when I became a student assistance counselor, I realized that the 12 credits I earned to be a SAC was just not enough. At the time, I was grandfathered into those 12 credits. There's more credits now. It just wasn't enough for the tremendous amount of mental health issues my students were facing. And so I returned to school to get my license as a therapist. And like you, TJ, I, as a coach and as a teacher, it was so much more about the relationship and outside of the classroom and the content that was connecting me to young people. They were coming after class or after practice or after a game to talk about life issues, life problems. And that's when I knew that there were some constraints for me as an educator, and that I really wanted to tap into this thing that was naturally happening, where I was supporting young people's mental health. And that's really what motivated me to get my license and then go into private practice. So I've had a tremendously robust journey already in my life, but that's just the beginning of my career, I guess, right now.
All right. Thank you, Alisha. And I'm going to right now, hold on, add a pin. I'm going to add another pin here. So right now we have our magnificent moderator who has been spectacular in the last couple of events for our speaker series, Kimberly Dickstein Hughes, the 2020 New Jersey State Teacher of the Year and English Language Arts teacher at Haddonfield Memorial High School, who is joining us from her classroom. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Now, at this time, if you have questions for the panel, you can drop them in the Q&A. We have a series of questions that were submitted ahead of the actual event, so we're going to start with some of those. But any additional questions you might have, go ahead and put them in there, and we will try and make sure that we get to everything. So, Kimberly, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. D. Okay, I've had the great honor of working with both Alisha and TJ, and I feel this great sense of inspiration and calm and joy just being in your presence virtually. So we're going to go on this journey with everyone on the call, but I just wanted to thank you and express my gratitude for sharing your stories. So we're going to get into the students' questions first. So I want to start with just identity, and that theme has come up quite a bit in both of your talks, and how both of you identify. And I'm wondering, for both, do you view yourself more as a mental health advocate or an educator, or is there a balance there? Like, how do you see yourself? Like, what's your lens going out into the world? And I want to start with Alisha and then TJ.
Okay, awesome. So I think no matter what I do, I will identify as being an educator at heart, right? I feel like all the work that I do is deeply connected to, providing opportunities for people to challenge their thinking, see through a new lens, and embodying, the values that are so important for us to be successful in life. And so in many ways, I think that is an educator, right? Like challenging ideas and bringing new perspectives and lenses, and then showing up like that, like really showing up like that. And so I will always identify as an educator. It doesn't matter what I do in life. I will never let that label go. And then as far as, my focus on mental health, everything that I have done, I've really had the privilege of having an integrative approach. So as a licensed clinician, I didn't learn to use the DSM to put labels on people and diagnose them. I didn't learn the mental health work that I do through this lens of illness. And so the lens that I learned and the teachings and teachers that trained me had an integrative lens of integrating practices, Western and Eastern practices. And so in many ways, I feel like everything that I do integrates identity, social justice, education, mental health, SEL. They're all integrated and woven like this beautiful fabric that we all are made of. And so I feel like it's pretty balanced and integrative, my social justice, my mental health, and my educator titles?
I'm going to pick up on that integrative word because it was the first thing I thought about. To anybody who's out there going into education, if you think you can separate the two, you're going to do a disservice. We are both by nature. You know, there's content we teach. However, we can't teach that content to somebody who is hurting, who is afraid, who has undergone trauma. And so I think that the first thing we have to look at is keeping a temperature of the room and where it is. And we have to work as the regulators. We have to be the ones that control where that is, because we can stand in front of the room as in my classroom. I can stand and teach as much as I want, and it doesn't mean anyone's learning. And that person that's just gone through an event or just gone through some kind of a trauma, they're not ready to learn yet. So I have to marry those two together. And it's really important that you never separate them, because when we did Michael's workshop and he had us go through, and if I'm sure you've all seen it, it's the ACEs, which looks at adverse childhood experiences. And you find out how few people score a 0 on there. However, when I look at that, it doesn't even address some other areas, because obviously, okay, here are 10 areas, but it doesn't address somebody who has undergone trauma because they are gay, or somebody who is a minority and undergoes a trauma every day that they walk the streets and they go through life. Somebody who's a female who has just tried to find their role in this, male dominated society at times. So ACEs is one, but every one of us, if we look in the mirror, has undergone some trauma. And I think we as adults who hopefully are getting to the point where we've, as Alisha said, we found our tricks that work for us. We found the techniques that help us. As an educator, we're obligated to hand those over to kids to help them and to try to guide them into the world in a little bit of a better way.
So as educators who integrate mental health advocacy and beyond, like into your identity, like your lens of the world, in your professional opinions, when do we begin this work in schools? That's a question from one of the students. Like what grade, what age do we actually begin social emotional learning?
When I read that question in advance, it just made me think about how this starts from day one of life, right? The neural networks are being developed based on our lived experiences from before we were even born, right? And so when children experience challenges, and we live in a chaotic world or a dangerous world, educators have this remarkable opportunity to provide these like daily interactions and daily doses of kindness, of compassion, of empathy for young people to offset that trauma that TJ was talking about. And so it starts way before they get to school, but when they get to school and they've already been challenged in these ways that it's challenging to show up in social emotional competence because of the experiences they've had, our role from day one that we engage with young people is to embody this regulation and self-care for ourselves so that we can show up and hold this space for young people. So it starts way before we ever even engage with them. And then as far as explicitly teaching this, it starts in kindergarten, right? It starts in pre-K, it starts in daycare.
So what does that look, so TJ, to that same question, mm-hmm. What does that look like at the secondary level? And then Alisha, you've worked the all levels. Like, what does it look like in primary? Because that's what students are kind of wondering about, like the activities, what does that look like in each class period? So the tangibles of it.
I think it's going to be different for there's a question, and I just kind of pre-read, but I'm going to tie in. The issue you have is, and I'm sure Alisha has seen this in schools that she's talked to, unfortunately, you have some teachers who buy in, and then you have some teachers who do not. And it's sad to watch some teachers try to use some fake sense of power over these kids. Like, here's a perfect example. When I first started teaching, there was this huge thing on, you can't have a kid just go out and take a walk in the hall like they have the pass book. Well, we know for a fact that sometimes one of the best ways, if I'm in the high school, if I'm uptight and I'm upset, one of the best ways to deregulate is to walk away for a minute. And like, I will encourage kids, and I've talked to other teachers about it. take a lap. We have a big loop in our building. Take a walk, because you have to understand in the high school when a child is ready to talk and when they're not. And you can't go and try to talk to them when they're not ready to talk to you. Like sometimes they're so shaking and just frustrated that they need to kind of unwind themselves before I can even undertake, we're going to do a breathing exercise. We're going to sit. They have to get some stuff out of their system first. So to answer your question in another way, in my classroom, I try to start every period. We're hybrid. So in order to connect to everybody, I alternate between starting an icebreaker that is something that is a very, very simple question that can engage a conversation. It can be as I'll say moronic, but it was my question of, do you eat the crust on your sandwich or don't you?
I do.
It can go the other way to talk about a family tradition, or if you don't have a family tradition, a neighborhood tradition, or something you do with a friend. But it gets everybody talking. And then other days I'll do either a mindfulness practice, or the other day I just did an alternate nostril breathing, a yoga technique. And it was so funny because I had a student come back a couple days later and say, oh my gosh, my boyfriend got me so mad and I just went alone and I did that and I actually calmed down. So, I think that it kind of tails in. The biggest thing I find is, as much as we can grassroots do it as teachers, it's us constantly selling it to administrators, because it has to become whole school. It can't be a pocket here and a pocket there, because that's not fair to the kids who aren't in those pockets.
Yeah, I think you wanted me to talk about the other grade levels, Kimberly. So I think, what TJ's saying is really important to capture, is that every single kid will need something very different, right? I just did a session on well-being and self-care for educators, and not everybody takes care of themselves the same way. So not every child needs to come in and meditate first thing in the morning. Like, meditation is wonderful. I use it a lot. But some kids need to connect with another person, and they take care of themselves by addressing their social needs. So other kids need to get quiet, right? And they need to meditate or do mindfulness or breath work. Other children, and this is not just unique to children, it's adults too. Other young people need to move through their bodies, like that walk that TJ was talking about. Every single child will need something different. So it's important to provide opportunities for them to explore all of these ways to regulate, so that they can start to take some ownership over, oh, you know what, I need to walk right now. And then, okay, what do you need to get ready back into your thinking brain? I need to walk. Okay, I need to meditate. I need to go off into the back of the room and play with some kinetic sand. So by introducing all of these different ways to regulate yourself, then children can start to have the agency to choose what they need. And then it can be kind of self-monitored by them. So one thing I think is really important is carving out time in a schedule, in a daily schedule, to have some sense of community. And we know that right now, with this collective trauma that we've experienced, that collective healing is important. So whether that's a morning meeting for elementary kids, at the middle school level, there could be like an advisory, and I've done this on all 3 levels when we went district wide with our SEL implementation. And then at the high school, they were more geared towards the restorative practice circles. And so, but everyone connected in a circle. Pre-K through 12, the morning started with a circle, and there were just different levels of risk or conversation, as menial or as simple as the crust on your food, to like really intentionally being inclusive. Because here's the reality, when we provide these opportunities for people to talk, if we are not intentionally being inclusive, especially of identities and culture and lived experiences, then we run the high likelihood of being unintentionally exclusive. So you actually have to plan in, like, how do I want to celebrate and lift up identity here? And so, so that intentionality piece is really important. And you're not going to have a lot of difference. I started my work at the high school level with an SEL kind of integration of SEL. And many people think that that's just elementary, and if we look at across the country where it drops off, like SEL integration, it's usually around 3rd grade. But our 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way through 12th graders need this too. It just looks a little bit differently. But mindfulness, meditation, morning meetings, morning circles, all of this can be done at every single level.
Alisha, in your experience in working with different schools, and this is one of the questions from the students, have you noticed a difference in the students' like lives or behaviors who have integrated social emotional learning versus those that have not set aside that time? And what does that look like at the school level, if you have noticed that?
Yeah, well, the research supports that kids who are given the opportunity to learn about SEL and to practice these strategies and tools and competencies, they have much better behavior outcomes. So the behavior improves, academics improve, even lifetime success improves if we look at the trajectory of young people being introduced to SEL practices. So SEL, and let's be clear about what SEL is, right? SEL is not just those 5 competencies. SEL is also being trauma informed, right? SEL is also mindfulness. SEL is also social justice advocacy and anti-racism work and lifting up identities. SEL is also tapping into our brain and mental health and neuroscience. It's all of those things, SEL, really as an approach, not as a curriculum or something you do on Mondays and you check off the box. So I've absolutely seen the impact on young people when they are taught and given these opportunities. In fact, I just hired a person to join our GSE team who was a student of mine, who we did social justice work and we did meditation and yoga in my office because she's 30 now and we weren't allowed to do that, more broadly throughout the district. And she is at such a different place than some of her peers because she's been able to utilize these things in her life now. So she is a social worker now, and she has been practicing facilitation since she was a teenager and peer mentorship she did in high school. So she just has so many more tools in her toolbox to show up as a professional.
Now, to that end, Alisha, just that story about that student, TJ, you're currently in the classroom and you're doing this work with your students. One of the questions was, do you format this into your lessons? And you made that pretty clear. Like it could be instinct, it could be something that starts the lesson. So it seems really flexible, social emotional learning. But could you share with us, and because I know this to be a truth of yours, how this work has impacted your students, whether it's the field hockey team or teachers, how that's been turned around for you?
I think I'll go through, I've noticed looking at teachers, that's the first thing, the work that I've been able to do with them and those that have taken part. It's funny, at times, some of them really kind of almost laugh it off, like, well, I'll go through the motions. And then later it boomerangs on them where they really find out, like, it's that Chinese proverb, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. Like sometimes you just have to give them the information and they're ready for it. It happens. The field hockey team and now the lacrosse team I've had a unique opportunity with. I have been working with their coaches and done guided meditations with their teams in order to, because it's the whole thing is before a game, everyone thinks you have to get hyped up and get crazy. And in a lot of ways, it's better to get focused so that when something happens on the field, you can regroup and grab to it. And it's funny, this will be a really out there reference. So if you don't get this, I'll explain it. I just sent them a link. There was of all things, UFC fighter, Rose Namajunas, who I love. She's a strawweight fighter. She's wonderful. Well, in her last match, when she was standing when they were announcing the names, she was saying to herself, I'm the best. I'm the best. I'm the best. And then when they interviewed her after, they asked her that question. They saw how focused she was. And they said, you're saying I'm the best. She says, well, I am the best. And yet she's the most humble person you'll ever meet. And that was a part of it too, convincing people you can believe in yourself and not be an egomaniac, and you can still have humility and how you balance that. And I think the biggest thing we found with teachers it's not just the mindfulness. The connection's important. We've started in our school. We've taken some of the kids who are at the highest risk and you can't assign a teacher. It kind of has to happen organically. But those teachers, every kid has some teacher that has a little bit more of a connection. So a couple of years ago, we had a young lady who was just going off the rails. And I knew her because Her family's worked where I work in the summer. So what I did is I sought her out. At first, it was questions about summer work, and then I broadened it out. And almost every day, 3 to 4 days a week, I would have just a 2-minute conversation with her and just have the connection. But all of a sudden, she knew there was a support in that school. And we've had more teachers who pick that up, where, you bring a student in and just find out it's a conversation. The biggest thing, and it's hard, as you can tell, because my mouth doesn't stop. The biggest thing I've learned is, and I've had to really retrain myself, is it's more important to listen. You don't always have to have an answer. And I've had kids say that, like, sometimes they don't want an answer. They just want to talk. They just want to get something off their chest. So that's been a big, as teachers, we always want to hand out an answer. And sometimes you have to learn that you just need to listen to them.
Well, TJ and Alisha, just listening to that might actually answer the next question I am going to ask that's in the chat and also before, but like, how do you then help students heal and process current events within our society, like things that we haven't anticipated, like a pandemic, like a court case, like any turning on the television, seeing a traumatic event? How do you help students heal and process in the moment? What is the best thing that teachers can do and students can do for each other?
I'm unmuted, so I'll stay, and then I'll hand it to Alisha. But I think that to me, that's listening, giving them a voice and legitimizing what they have to say. Like, really, and somebody asked about throwing out a lesson in the chat, and I'll be 100%. Yes, there are days I don't teach a lesson at all, because something's the day after, and I know, Kim, you did the same thing. The day after the Capitol building, there was no lesson that was going to deal with that. These kids were petrified. So we needed to talk, and we just needed to hear each other out. The best lesson I learned, oddly, came from an AP workshop I did. And it was a teacher that I didn't realize how connected to students he was. And he at one point said, like, he said, I implore you as a high school teacher, you're going to have a kid come in who's just broken up with somebody. Don't use that old line, oh, it's not a big deal, you'll get over it. At this point in their life, and you have to understand this as a teacher, this is the most traumatic thing they've been through. Allow them to hurt and to grieve and listen to what they say. And it's not going to stop racism, but at least when a kid knows that you're going to listen to their complaints and what they have to say, they know they have a safe haven.
Yeah. I would say, in response to educators showing up the day after, all of the social and political things happening in our world right now, the most important thing for teachers to do is grapple with it themselves first, right? This journey of our own awareness has to happen first. And it can't happen the day of an extreme incident, right? Like, this is a journey that I think is so essential to educators that it's a moral obligation that we grapple with these things and do our own work to be anti-racist, because children's lives are in our hands. And just like TJ said, we have the power to hurt or harm or heal. And so when I think about the positions that many educators have been in, but especially this year, it really requires a level of self-care, of your own self-care, of you managing your emotions around it so that you can show up as an empty container for young people to hold the spaces that they and the big emotions that they're having. And mindfulness is not separate from anti-racism teaching, like being an anti-racist teacher, because it's when we're most stressed, when we're most frustrated and the stress is mounting, that we have those knee-jerk reactions and we act on autopilot. And those moments, they require so much more of us. They require us not to have a knee-jerk reaction. They require us to be very thoughtful, intentional about our words and the power of our words. And so mindfulness is a part of showing up as an anti-racist educator, because you have to be able to tap into that pause that you've practiced time and time again before the heightened incident. You can't teach kids how to breathe. If anyone's ever told you, just breathe, when you're the most angry, it just doesn't work that way, right? Like, you have to practice breathing, intentionally before that moment. So as educators, you have to do your work before a Capitol riot, before, you know, a racist incident or one of our Black brothers or sisters being killed on TV and us watching it, or the outcome of a police officer who killed a Black person, you know, their trial. You have to do the work before those events happen so you can show up and you're ready to show up for those moments. And so mindfulness is not separate from doing this work. You have to be able to provide yourself the opportunities to do this work and to schedule your self-care so that you can show up in these moments.
I want to just add to that real quick, because what you said is when I teach, when I do my, especially with adults, when I do the meditation classes, I separate them in like, I always tell what we do for our 10-week program is when you're on the cushion, that's meditation. When you really internalize that, you can be mindful in your everyday life. And that's what we need to teach. It's hard on the kids, but if we can start it at a young age, wouldn't it be great if kids had all of these practices and I always refer to it as arrows in your quiver, whatever works for you. But if they could internalize that from pre-K, K up through, when they got into high school, you would have far less emotional reactions because we all have a gauge that there's a point when we can turn the gauge back. But until you know where that point is, you go into overdrive. So it's teaching kids, where's my turn? Where's the point in a conversation when I have to say, I need to walk away now. We'll talk later. And what I want every teacher to be able to understand is if a kid ever says that to you, that's the greatest thing, them knowing. But I have teachers who will like, no, we're talking at this moment. And for them to self-regulate and know, no, this isn't my time. I'll come back. I just need to calm down first. To me, that's what Alisha just said. Like that, we can't wait until the event. It has to be a constant process.
Yeah, TJ. Oh, sorry. I don't know. You know, TJ, when we were doing the work at the high school with a small cohort of kids in 2016, we were helping them find ways to regulate and understand what was going on in their brain. And then we were sending them back into classrooms with teachers that were dysregulated. And so, you know, this is not about kids, everybody. This is
about us.
Not about students. This is about the adults who show up serving young people. And so we realized very quickly, in fact, within just a few days and a week, that we needed to work on the educators at the same time, if not before we even got to the kids.
I think it's about all of us, right? Like that whole community, like as a whole. And like when I think about Dr. McNamara's question in the Q&A about the students who have been full virtual experiencing trauma, like at what point does content go out the window? I think that moment, right? Like I think that at some point you have to let that go and focus on your students. I think TJ spoke to that many times. Alisha talking about the work with schools. And as I'm listening to everything that you're saying, I'm going to take you both way back. Imagine yourself, you know, entering the school system again, and like the schools you're talking about and the classrooms you're talking about are the classrooms like you entered into. Like, how would that have changed some of your journey, maybe lightened your load? And I know this is like a super heavy question, but I mean, we're there. And so really think about like all the things that we're envisioning for our schools, that they have this space, those community meetings, that they can take the lap, and that was available to you in every class with every teacher from the moment you stepped into schools. How would that have changed your course or made your life different?
Well, I'm a product of a Catholic high school. So I think if I had that, I wouldn't have screwed up so many things before I got here. I've had a really large learning curve. And, but having said that, I don't know if I'd be who I was without that learning curve. So I think that's been a part of it. You know, I think it would have stopped a lot of issues I've had in my life and problems I've had in my life. And I don't think it would have taken me as long to become the empathetic and compassionate person that I am. I think I would have picked that up a little more quickly.
So I think I have a little bit of a twist on this. I think I'm going to answer it because I feel very privileged that I had very good experiences as a child with many of my teachers. I would have liked my other classes that much more if my teachers who I loved my teachers who I didn't like so much showed up more like the teachers that I loved. So here's what I have to say about it. it didn't matter what the content was in any class. The classes that I loved the most were the teachers who I had the deepest relationship with, that I felt the most cared for, that I mattered, that there was joy connected to whatever it was that they were teaching. Those were the classes I loved the most. Now, were they teaching me meditation? No. I wouldn't have had to learn that at 40 after the death of or at 20 after the death of my mother, right? And continue to practice it now as an adult. Like I would have had that as a skill set to deal with the challenges that came up in my life. So I wouldn't have had to learn it in the midst of the trauma, right? I would have had it as a tool, which would have been great. But it doesn't matter what the content was. I felt the most connected to learning when I felt seen and heard and valued, and there was joy. That's it. You could have taught me, I don't know, you could have taught me rocket science. As long as I knew that you cared about me, I would have loved whatever you were teaching me.
And I'm going to just take that and ask everybody in the audience a simple question, especially the adults in the audience. If you think back to high school and you really try to think about what I learned, I don't really recall that much. I do recall those teachers that I could count on. I do recall those rooms I felt comfortable. That's what stays with me. And the teachers I remember most are the ones that were supportive. And I think when we look at what our role is as a teacher, that's a big lesson for it.
And I remember their content better, TJ, right? So like, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that teacher and we did this, and so like, I remember their content, not because of the content, but because they infused love in it. That's it.
I agree.
That's it. Drop the mic. Like
the only way I can top that is quoting Maya Angelou, which I am going to do. So something that I think I've always leaned into is the quote from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think as an educator for me, and I'm going to share this bit of myself as the moderator, but I had a serious trauma, and I lost a really close friend in high school who had passed away in the beginning of my junior year. And I probably suffered from some severe depression, and I had nowhere to go and had no understanding of how to regulate that. And if I had teachers like you, I think I would have not suffered and been in such pain for so long. And even now I grapple with that, right? And I just remember pre-calc with Mrs. Barbario was such a blessing. Now I'm an English teacher. But I would go to her every day after school, and I would go for extra help, but I just needed Mrs. Barbario because she taught humans. And that's what you, TJ and Alisha, do. And you bring all of your joy and goodness to classrooms and schools across the state. So I just want to thank you for making us feel so much today. And I'm going to turn the program back to Dr. D for our final set of questions. But we're so honored to have you both here with us.
Thank you so much. Love is the answer, right? Love is the key. And I think, teaching with love, teaching with empathy is one of the greatest things you can bring to the profession, period. You have to love what you do, and you have to love the people you're working with. And sometimes they are really going to get on your last dang nerve, but you got to love them anyway, because those are the ones that are going to love you back the most for being a pest. All right, before I get, go ahead.
I just want to add what you just said. They're the kids that need it the most.
Oh yeah. So here's the fun part. I'm going to go Alisha, TJ, it's rapid fire. There's no wrong answers. It's just whatever comes to your brain first. Just keep it PG-13 because we are a school age program here. Okay, so first question, what is your favorite word? Alisha.
My favorite word, I would say, it's a tough one between wonder and nourish. Wonder and nourish are two of my favorite words.
Awesome. TJ.
My favorite word would be kindness. Other than that, for no reason, pickle.
All right. What is your least favorite word, Alisha?
There's many, so I would say anything that dehumanizes somebody else.
TJ?
I would say can't.
Can't. There you go. All right. If you could have any superhero power, what would it be, Alisha?
It would be to be able to provide healing. that would be my superpower.
Okay. TJ.
The nerd in me will come out. So I know I would probably like to be Professor X from the X-Men, and I would like to be able to get into people's heads so I can figure out what's wrong with them.
Cool. All right. Next question. What was your favorite subject when you were at school? Alisha.
I really loved art, but just like I had mentioned, any class where I felt really loved by my teachers.
Okay. TJ.
And as an English teacher, my favorite class when I was in school was physics.
It happens that way sometimes, right? Okay. So what subject or grade level do you wish you had taught, Alisha?
I've had the chance of being in with all students, but I think I never was teaching at like preschool or like lower elementary. I just worked with them as a social emotional learning coordinator. So I just thought there was so much joy in those classrooms. I would have loved to actually be a teacher in a classroom at elementary.
Okay. TJ.
I love what I'm doing now, so that would be the easy answer. I truly do. But if we could incorporate, I would love to teach a philosophy class. If we could have a philosophy class in high school,
That would be awesome. Yep. And in Hawaii, they have philosophy sort of embedded in their education program out there. I know somebody who does that. It's pretty
that'd be
cool.
nice.
Yep. All right. What subject or grade level would you not want to teach, Alisha?
I would say one of the things I always said as a middle school teacher was that 7th graders should go to the moon for a year and then come back.
All right, TJ.
Through when I go out with my students for future educators placement, I love the 45 minutes to an hour that I'm in with the kindergartners and first graders. I could not do that all day.
It's exhausting, isn't it? Just
Blessings to
watching them, it's
everybody who does that.
exhausting. All righty. What sound or noise do you love, Alisha?
I love the sound of laughter or joy.
Okay, TJ.
I love the sound of peepers, which are very small frogs that are in my neighborhood because they always remind me that spring is here when I walk the dogs and hear them. And they're such a happy sound.
All right. What sound or noise do you hate, Alisha?
Those cars that have those like loud mufflers, like when they drive by, you just like your whole body startles. I can't stand the noise of those cars.
Okay, TJ.
I'm gonna be a copycat. I'm gonna agree with the cars. I hate when I'm like, especially doing a beach meditation or just walking on the beach and I hear these loud cars go by and it just disrupts that whole flow.
All right. Okay, next question. If someone were to play you in a movie version of your life, who would you want it to be, Alisha?
Oh, hands down, Ruby Rose. She is such a bad Ruby Rose.
Ruby Rose. All right, TJ.
It would never work, but I just think after reading about his life, Benedict Cumberbatch is so amazing that I would go for that. More likely it would be Richard Dreyfuss, but I would hope for Benedict Cumberbatch.
Okay. All right. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt, Alisha?
I feel like my answers are so lame. I feel like I have the most, blessed life to be able to do what I love. And so I don't think I could see myself doing anything else.
Okay. TJ?
I don't want to totally copy, but I feel that way. However, as I'm looking at this point in my career and where I am, I'm a little envious of Alisha. I like the idea of like working on a bigger scale with making this happen.
All right. And last question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates? Alisha?
You changed the world.
TJ?
I've been in you the whole time. I wish you realized it.
There you go. All right. Thank you, folks. Love is the answer. Love is the key. So yeah, this was a great session. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kimber had one last question.
If you have a minute, I'll answer that question.
Yeah. So if you can hang out, that's great. If you need to go, you can go. This will all be on the recording that you'll be able to see later. So thank you all for joining us today. But if you'd like to hang out for a couple more questions, we're here. Thanks.
That was awesome. Those were the best answers ever. They were so great. There's one question from a student that I know is lingering and the teacher advocated for them. So I wanted to honor that. But students, after listening to this call and feeling so inspired, why do you think some teachers would resist SEL work in schools and classrooms?
I'll take it first because I think I have some firsthand and then I can hand it over because there might be different. I think I think number one is part of it has to admit that some of the things you were doing were wrong. And that's hard on anybody. It's really hard on teachers who stand in the front of the room and always have the answer. And sometimes you have to admit you don't. Two, I think there are, and one of my best friends I know feels this way, who was a math teacher. Like, the most important thing in the world is my curriculum, and I have to get to this point by this moment. And I think that puts blinders on. So they're resistant to any of these things. And lastly, sadly, I know we have the teachers who are in a very old school mindset of suck it up and lift yourself up. And if I could do it, you can do it, and move ahead. So that's kind of what I see. And it's sad because it's hard to get through to those people. Mm-hmm. And I think that you have to accept, and maybe Alisha will prove me wrong, and I hope so. But in my view, I think you have to accept that there's maybe a very small 2 to 3 to 4% you're never going to get to, and you just have to hope they retire soon.
I don't disagree. I would love to think that I could, see the change in every single person, but there's some things you have to accept that, might not happen. But some of my answers are very similar to TJ's. One, I think, educators are in a power position, and that's because, we whether we know that or not, there's some part of that we might like, right? That we have some power in the classroom. And I think SEL really is about student choice and agency, and that requires that requires us, actually, all as educators, to let go of some of that power, to not have to be right, to believe and value that young people can teach us something, right? And so I think it's a shift in power dynamics that some people, I'm not here for that. I hold all the power. I tell you what to do. So it's styles of teaching, right? So that requires some people to let that go. I also think it's exhausting sometimes to be so intentional and to be so mindful of every word and every way that you carry yourself. And so some people just are not there yet where they've put that time in for themselves to be able to show up in that way. And so it could be very exhausting, also gratifying, to show up very intentional. And then, not everybody loves change. And so that old school thinking that TJ was talking about, this requires a growth mindset and showing up, kind of letting go of the things that hold you back. So it really requires people and educators to step out of their comfort zone, and not everybody is ready for that, unfortunately, because there's good stuff that happens when you get out of your comfort zone.
That's when the learning happens.
Well, I think all those folks need to watch this webinar, and maybe they might feel the move to change, right? The living yes.